What is up, guys? And the OKC Thunder have exceeded everyone's expectations this season. They're firmly in the West playoffs, and their success has largely been due to their 9th ranked defense. And their defense is a really interesting study because they completely revamped their defensive system from the year before. So, let's get to it. Let's start in that 18-19 season, which feels like forever ago, as they had Westbrook and Paul George leading the way, and their defensive scheme was very aggressive. Most notably, they got level with their ball screen defense. Here, notice how Noel is up versus the screener as he anticipates the ball screen, and then he gets level as OKC sends 2 to the ball. This does let the roll man get behind Noel, but good rotations can put out the fire. They played this style all season. It also worked. They finished 3rd in defensive rating, and first off, their centers allowed this ball screen scheme to be possible. Steven Adams is smart and has just enough lateral quickness to slide and be effective. His backup was Noel, who is one of the most gifted athletes in the NBA, and he could slide on the perimeter and quickly recover to the paint. But the reason this ball screen defense made sense was due to their insane length and athleticism across the board. Westbrook, George, and Jeremy Grant as your forwards. It was just overwhelming for teams. On this pick and roll, you have Westbrook and Adams at the point of attack, and George and Grant can use speed and length to play 2-on-3 on the weak side. Here, Grant switches on to Russell, and then in the ball screen, Russell probably has Allen for a pocket pass, but look how hard it is to pass around all that length. So while we're not here to remember the 2019 Thunder like they were juggernauts, they did cause havoc defensively. They forced heaps of turnovers with their scheme, and George made first team all defense. Now last summer, of course, OKC made some trades, and their personnel changed quite a bit. And when we start comparing their starting lineups from a defensive perspective, we see they're not nearly as long or athletic, particularly in the front court. Losing George for Shai hurts, and Gallinari doesn't add speed and rim protection like Grant. So Coach Billy Donovan said, yeah, we need to change. And change they did. Their pick and roll scheme went from super aggressive to very conservative. Here we are in 2020, and look how Adams is now in a deep drop, and they'll live with the floater. So now the ball handler can come off and look to make a play, but by keeping their center near the rim, they protect the paint better. They also usually defend the pick and roll with just 2. Here Adams is willing to drop super deep to not let Robinson get behind him because he knows the weak side defenders will stay home on the shooters. And sometimes the offense gets good shots. To start, we see Hamidou Diallo ice the pick and roll, keeping it away from the middle, and OKC calls it push. And then we see it's night and day with Noel. He drops to keep the play in front of him. We'll get into the statistical impact in a moment, but you can already see the trade-off this scheme is making. Create less turnovers, but force more mid-range shots. Also, the drop can be vulnerable versus good pull-up shooters, and here with Adams back, Tatum can fire. And this is definitely a weakness of the scheme. Now, let's look at the numbers. The 4 factors are the 4 key stats that define a team's offense or defense, and here's how OKC ranks in these factors. In the 18-19 season, teams shot okay versus them. They were second best in the league at forcing turnovers, they rebounded well, largely due to Westbrook and George, and they fouled a lot. This season, they forced less turnovers, in my opinion mostly due to their scheme change. They got smaller, which hurt their rebounding, and with different personnel and a conservative scheme, they were 3rd best at not fouling. I know a lot of you don't want to stare at numbers, but these factors define a team's identity, and this is what coaches look at. And the scheme greatly impacted opponent shot attempts as well. This year, OKC was 9th at preventing shots at the rim, a big improvement, and in the process, they were 24th at preventing mid-range shots, which is a good thing. This is basically saying teams shot a lot of mid-range shots versus them. And when we look back to 18-19, we see why most teams don't blitz in the pick and roll. Sending 2 to the ball will result in more shots at the rim, with the defense no longer encouraging the mid-range. So why is this worth discussing? Well, to me, I can't help but be impressed with Billy Donovan and the coaching staff. He had the number 3 defense built around long arms and a team that could trap and rotate, but when his roster changed, from game 1 they played a style that isn't necessarily better, but it was for their current team. Their 9th ranked defense was better than what people expected. Also, their scheme change wasn't just in the pick and roll. In general, their centers now lay off much more to protect the paint. Look how Adams doesn't apply ball pressure, which lets him take away a post entry. I like how they didn't just change a bit, but instead went pretty heavily on a different scheme to form an identity. And while it's not always this drastic, look how Adams sags off of favors. Milwaukee clearly influenced their defense. Before, their bigs would always be applying pressure, and this even made some sense from a rim protection standpoint. Check this out. Adams is at the 3-point line, and OKC could feel comfortable with this because of the other defenders. Bogdanovic rejects the screen, Adams can't help, but the length of George, Westbrook, and Grant converge. That's just not possible now, so OKC's bigs are properly stationed closer to the rim, and their centers deserve a lot of credit for being able to play both schemes pretty well. Noel is super versatile, and here he uses his length well in the drop. And Adams isn't great, but he's smart, and doesn't let the roll man get behind him. So their base system shored up the rim protection, and what also forms their identity is their point of attack defense, meaning they're tough and nasty on ball. And since being put in the starting lineup over Ferguson, it all starts with Luguentz Dort. This guy is a monster. Here he's on Kemba, and he brushes screens aside. He guards the other team's best perimeter scorer, and it's a real luxury because he's quick enough to pressure them and force tough shots. Watch him here. First, he busts through 3 screens, and then he stays in front. And what separates him from Ferguson is he's extremely strong, allowing him to handle bigger wings such as Tatum. But it's not just Dort. As a collective backcourt, they do a good job of pressuring the ball, and Schroeder is the best at picking up full court and making life tough, here taking precious seconds off the shot clock for the Knicks. This really helps in the pick and roll. Drop coverage can work, but it's vital to impact the ball. Here, watch how Paul gets tight to Tatum, allowing him to fight over the pick. And when Paul wants to, he can dial it in and get into guys, and guarding Tatum types helps them play 3-guard lineups. So while their centers sag back and don't apply pressure, their guards do, and it helps them strike a nice balance defensively. Here, look how Ferguson gets into the ball and fights over the screen, and since he stayed attached, it makes life easier for Adams, who's protecting the rim. And this is where the strength lies in their role players. Dort, Ferguson, and Diallo are all negatives offensively, but these guys are really good when it comes to point of attack defense. This looks like trying to get by the computer on the hardest difficulty. And if you had to pick one clip to sum up their defense, this would be it. Schroeder applies pressure, Adams is protecting the paint, and Ferguson blows up the handoff. And the drop gives up a mid-range shot. Your 2020 Bulls, everyone. Well, there you have it, guys. For each of the last 2 seasons, OKC has been fully committed to a defensive scheme that fit their personnel, which isn't something every team can say. I'll see you next time.